The morning sun crept slowly over the hills, spilling soft gold across the cracked fields and stone cottages of a small mountain village. The world was just waking, roosters crowed, goats bleated in the distance, and smoke curled lazily from the chimneys. But in one corner of the village, where the road turned to dust and weeds grew through broken fences, a man's voice broke the peace. "Move, you stubborn creature!" Rahim shouted, tugging the frayed rope in his hands. His weathered face was flushed with anger and exhaustion. In front of him stood a thin gray donkey, ribs visible beneath its rough coat, eyes dull and tired. The donkey, named Burro, simply blinked and refused to move. Rahim yanked again, but the animal only took one reluctant step before freezing once more. "Useless," Rahim muttered bitterly. "You're as hopeless as I am." He dropped the rope and rubbed his forehead with trembling hands. His palms were calloused, his nails packed with dirt from years of failed harvests and endless labor. The fields had given him nothing but dust for 3 years. The rain came too little, too late, and when it did, it drowned his crops instead of saving them. Burro had been his only companion through it all, his partner in work, his silent witness through every disappointment. They had hauled buckets of water when the well went dry, carried wood for people who paid barely enough to eat, and walked miles under the blazing sun for one more hopeless try at life. But now Rahim had reached his breaking point. He stared at the donkey with hollow eyes. "I can't keep feeding you when I can barely feed myself." The words came out like stones. "Tomorrow, I'll sell you in the market. Maybe someone will want you. Maybe not." The next morning, the sky was a pale gray. Rahim wrapped an old cloth around his head and led Burro down the rocky path toward the market. The road was long, winding between olive trees and dry bushes. Villagers passed by, greeting him politely, but Rahim barely answered. His mind was elsewhere, filled with the sound of unpaid debts, the landlord's threats, and the image of his late father's field now overrun with weeds. At the market, Rahim tied Burro to a post and waited. Farmers came and went, haggling over goats, cows, and grain. A few stopped to look at Burro. One man touched his back and shook his head. "Old bones," he said. Another glanced at his dull eyes and whispered, "He's finished." By midday, no one had offered even a single coin. The heat pressed down like a hammer, and Rahim's mouth went dry. Frustration twisted in his chest. He untied the donkey and began the long walk home. The air shimmered with heat, and the road stretched endlessly ahead. Rahim's feet dragged through the dust. "Even selling you was too much to ask," he said bitterly. "Maybe the curse isn't just on me, it's on both of us." Burro's ears twitched at the sound of his master's voice, but he plodded along silently. When they reached the edge of the village, Rahim stopped to rest under a lone acacia tree beside an old, dried-up well. The well had been abandoned for years, its stones cracked and half buried in weeds. Rahim sat down heavily, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked out at the endless horizon, his heart heavier than his body. "What's the point anymore?" he whispered. "Everything I touch turns to dust." He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the faint rustle of wind through the grass. That was when it happened, a sudden sharp snap, a startled bray, and then a hollow thud. Rahim's eyes flew open. "Burro!" He turned sharply and ran toward the sound. The donkey was gone. Panic surged through him as he leaned over the edge of the well. His stomach dropped. Burro was at the bottom, flailing and braying, covered in dust but alive. "Oh, no!" Rahim shouted, voice echoing down the shaft. "Hold on!" But as he looked around, there was nothing, no rope long enough, no one nearby to help. He tried lowering a branch, but it broke before reaching halfway down. Sweat rolled down his temples. He called for help, but the only answer was the cry of a crow circling above. Hours passed. The sun began to sink behind the hills. Rahim's hope drained away with the light. He sank to his knees beside the well. "I can't save you," he whispered. "Even if I could pull you out, you're too weak. You'd suffer." He stood up slowly, shoulders heavy with sorrow. "Maybe it's better this way," he said quietly. "At least it will end quickly." With trembling hands, he picked up a shovel that lay nearby, used once for clearing weeds. He looked down one last time at the frightened animal and whispered, "Forgive me." Then he began to shovel dirt into the well. The first clumps fell heavily on Burro's back. The donkey cried out, the sound sharp and desperate. Rahim winced but kept going. Each scoop of dirt echoed with guilt. "It's mercy," he told himself. "It's mercy." But after several minutes, the cries stopped. The well grew strangely quiet. Raheem hesitated and looked down. He could barely see through the rising dust, but then he heard something. Thump, shuffle, thump. What? Raheem leaned closer. Each time a load of dirt fell, the donkey moved, shaking his body, stepping upward. The dirt wasn't burying him, it was lifting him. Raheem froze. He threw in more dirt. Thump, shuffle, thump. Again, Burro shook off the dust and stepped higher. A strange heat filled Raheem's chest, not the heat of the sun, but something alive. Hope. He grabbed the shovel and threw in more dirt, faster now, watching as the donkey kept climbing, inch by inch, never stopping. Hours passed. The sun vanished and the sky deepened to a red glow. Raheem's muscles burned, sweat soaked his shirt, but he couldn't stop. He kept digging and throwing, until finally, just as the first stars appeared, he heard a scraping sound. Then, from the edge of the well, a gray head appeared, followed by two dirt-covered ears. With a final heave, Burro stepped out onto the ground, trembling but alive. His coat was brown with dust, his legs shaking, but his eyes were bright. Raheem stared, unable to speak. He dropped the shovel. His heart pounded as tears blurred his vision. Slowly, he walked toward the donkey, placed a hand on his neck, and whispered, You didn't give up. He knelt beside Burro and began to cry, not from grief this time, but from something far deeper. All this time I thought life was trying to bury me, he said softly. But maybe it was helping me climb. The donkey brayed softly, the sound echoing through the quiet valley. The stars flickered brighter above them. That night, Raheem didn't return home. He stayed beside the well with his donkey, watching the moon rise. And when the first light of dawn touched the horizon, he stood up with new strength in his eyes. He looked at the well one last time and whispered, If you can climb out of what was meant to bury you, so can I. From that day on, everything changed. The years drifted by like gentle wind through the valley, softening everything they touched. The once barren land that had starved Raheem was now rich with green. Wheat and barley swayed in the breeze, orchards bloomed with promise, and laughter returned to the small farmhouse that had long stood in silence. Raheem was no longer the man who shouted at fate. His face was older, his beard streaked with silver, but his eyes carried peace, the kind that only comes from surviving despair. Beside him, grazing lazily in the sun, was the same gray donkey, Burro. Time had bent his back and slowed his steps, but there was still a spark in his gentle eyes, the same quiet strength that had once defied death itself. The village children adored him. Every evening, when the sky turned orange and the shadows grew long, they would run to Raheem's gate, shouting, Uncle Raheem. Tell us the story again. Raheem would smile, wipe his hands on his worn tunic, and sit on a wooden crate beneath the acacia tree. Burro would stand behind him, swishing his tail, as if he, too, was listening. The children would gather in a semicircle, their faces glowing with excitement. Do you want to know, Raheem would begin in a soft, gravelly voice, how this old donkey taught me more about life than any man ever did? They would nod eagerly, eyes wide. Raheem's stories were more than words to them, they were lessons, magic carved from truth. He would take a slow breath and begin the tale, the same way every time. Long ago, when I had nothing, no crops, no money, not even hope, this donkey was all I had. One day, he fell into a well, and as his words flowed, the children would lean forward, imagining the dark well, the falling dirt, the brave little animal climbing higher with every load meant to bury him. When Raheem reached the part where Burro finally stepped out of the well, he would always pause. His voice would tremble slightly, and his hand would rest gently on the donkey's neck. He didn't wait for someone to save him, Raheem would say. He saved himself. He used what was meant to destroy him to rise higher. That day, I learned, whatever life throws at you, shake it off and step up. The children would cheer. They would pet Burro's dusty coat and giggle when he nudged them gently with his nose. Some of them whispered that he was a magical donkey who could understand human words. Others said he was blessed by God. Raheem never corrected them. In his heart, he believed both might be true. Word of Raheem's story spread beyond the village. Travelers came from nearby towns just to hear it. One evening, a merchant arrived on horseback, wearing fine clothes and a wide grin. He dismounted and greeted Raheem warmly. Old man, I've heard stories of your donkey, the one who climbed out of a well. Is it true? Raheem smiled faintly. Every word. The merchant chuckled. Then that beast is a miracle. I'd like to buy him. I'll pay a good price, enough to make your old age comfortable. The offer hung in the air. The villagers nearby grew silent. Rahim looked at Burro, who was chewing grass contentedly, and then back at the merchant. He's not for sale, he said quietly. The merchant raised an eyebrow. Why not? He's just a donkey. Rahim's gaze softened. You're wrong. He's the reason I'm standing here today. No gold can replace what he taught me. The merchant laughed awkwardly, embarrassed by the firmness in Rahim's tone. As you wish, old man, he said, mounting his horse again. But you could have been rich. As he rode away, Rahim whispered to Burro, you see. They still don't understand. It's not gold that changes your life, it's wisdom. That night, as the stars spread across the dark sky, Rahim sat beside the well, the same one where everything had changed. He stared into its shadowed depths, imagining the frightened bray that had once echoed there. Now the well was filled with earth and flowers grew over it. Burro stood nearby, his head low, eyes half closed. You remember, don't you? Rahim said softly. How we climbed out together. The donkey gave a soft grunt, almost like a sigh. Rahim smiled. You changed everything, old friend. Time continued its steady march. Rahim grew older, his hair turning completely white. He could no longer work the fields himself, but his sons, young men who had grown up hearing the story, took over with pride. They worked with gratitude, always remembering their father's lesson. When life buries you, use it to rise. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Burro lay down beneath the acacia tree where the story had been told countless times. Rahim noticed him from afar and walked over, his steps slow but steady. He knelt beside the donkey, brushing his rough coat gently. You're tired, he whispered. You've carried enough weight for 100 lifetimes. The old donkey turned his head slightly, pressing his muzzle against Rahim's knee. His breathing was slow, peaceful. The air around them was quiet, heavy with the hum of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves. Rahim stayed there for a long time, stroking his companion's head until the movement stopped. Burro passed away that night, quietly, as the moon climbed high above the fields he had helped restore. The village mourned him as they would a person. Children wept, farmers bowed their heads, and Rahim buried him beside the well. Over the grave, he placed a smooth stone carved with the words, "Here lies Burro, the donkey who climbed out of the well and taught men how to rise." Years later, even after Rahim too had gone, the story lived on. Travelers came to the little farm, now run by Rahim's grandchildren, to see the stone and hear the tale. Some came in search of inspiration, others came in gratitude, saying the story had saved them from giving up. Every evening, the acacia tree still cast its long shadow over the field, and someone would always be there, an elder, a farmer, a child, retelling the story of the donkey who refused to die in the dark. The well became a symbol of resilience, people would touch its stones and whisper prayers before leaving. And sometimes, when the wind blew softly through the valley, it seemed to carry a faint sound, half breeze, half memory, of a donkey gentle bray, echoing across the years. In that small village, hope became part of the air itself. The people no longer feared being buried by life's hardships. They had learned, from one stubborn, dusty creature, that every burden carried the seed of a step upward. And so the story lived, not as a fable, not as a legend, but as truth carved into the hearts of those who heard it. Because sometimes, the greatest teacher doesn't wear a crown, or hold a book, or speak at all. Sometimes, he just shakes off the dirt, and climbs.